Welcome everyone to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems Spring Speaker Series. My name is Hannah Bartram and I'm the Education and Public Engagement Coordinator for APHIS. And today we are delighted to welcome Sofia Elizondo, co-founder and COO of Brightseed. And she'll be talking about the changing landscape of food and health. But before I introduce Sofia, let me give a quick introduction to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems, also known as AIFS or APHIS. The Institute was established in 2020 under a NSF USDA NIFA grant with the mission of developing and leveraging transformative AI for the ethical production and distribution of safe, sustainable, nutritious food with fewer resources. APHIS is a multidisciplinary collaboration between researchers at 6 different institutions, conducting research with a holistic integrated view of the food system, solving challenges in molecular breeding, agricultural production, food processing and distribution, and nutrition, as well as looking at the people behind the food system using AI and technology as enablers. If you would like more information on the research and engagement activities of APHIS, please visit our website and connect with us on social media. Our speaker series features thought leaders addressing food system challenges using artificial intelligence. We are nearing the end of our spring speaker series, and we have just one upcoming event. Our fireside panel discussion will bring together all 4 speakers from the spring. It has been postponed, but we'll have a new date soon. You can learn more at the link at the bottom of your screen. All the recordings from our speaker series are posted on our YouTube channel, which you can find a link to from our website or on your screen. And today I am delighted to be introducing Sofia Elizondo. Sofia is the co-founder and COO of Brightseed, a biotechnology company that harnesses artificial intelligence to reveal critical compounds in plants to address humanity's greatest health challenges. As an award-winning tech business leader, Sofia is committed to endowing people with fundamentally longer and healthier lives, and has built multi-million-dollar companies and brands in the consumer goods, pharmaceutical, and technology industries. Prior to Brightseed, she led the commercialization of plant-based protein products, including the novel mung bean protein isolate to replace egg functionality. And Sofia began her career at the Boston Consulting Group and was also a founding member of the BCG Henderson Institute, the consulting firm's think tank on the future of business innovation. She also served as an advisor to the UN Global Compact, the United Nations agency focused on the private sector, while it developed its global corporate sustainability standards released at the 2011 World Economic Forum in Davos. Her decades of leadership in the space of corporate social innovation now enable Brightseed's mission to resource companies looking for scientifically validated and naturally derived products that can transform human health. Sofia holds a BA in philosophy, politics, and economics from the University of Pennsylvania, and an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. She lives in San Francisco, California with her husband and 2 young daughters. And Sofia has been recognized for her leadership, innovation, and entrepreneurship with a number of awards. So we're very excited to be able to hear from her today. And today's discussion will be moderated by Harold Schmitz, co-founder and general partner of March Capital US and a senior scholar in the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis. And this discussion is meant to be interactive, so we strongly encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A section throughout today's event. We'll have time for questions at the end, and a note that closed captioning is available. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sofia, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you for having me, Hannah, and Harold, thank you so much for the invite to be here. Let me pull a screen up. Let me know if you can all see that.
Yeah, looks good.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. As Hannah said, I'm a co-founder of Brightseed, and we're a 5-year-old company that illuminates nature to restore human health. Hannah, thanks for covering my background, and I think the most interesting part of that is that I touched on both both health and food in my early career, starting at BCG, working with global companies that addressed both of those areas, and I'm really happy to be bringing those kind of spheres together in this part of the stage of my career, and I'll share some of that with you today. So we'll go on a little journey, and we'll start with food. And I know I'm preaching to the choir and the experts, but we'll just touch base on where we are, where the food system is today from a kind of production perspective, how that connects with health, and what's going on in the health landscape. And at the end, we'll kind of synthesize that with AI. Like, what does AI have to do with any of this? And I'll share just a high level of Brightseed's approach, and why we think it's so relevant and important for today's changing times. So please chime in with questions. Would love to, as Hannah said, make this interactive, and happy to chat more at the end. I think I really like to level set with a reminder that food used to play the very obvious role of nourishment and medicine. Millennia ago, we kind of understood that spices and herbs and certain plants had medicinal properties. We also understood that ways of preparation had a big impact in what was expressed in that product. And Ayurvedic traditions are particularly rich. So is traditional Chinese medicine in that, not only the raw material, but how one prepares it and consumes it. And kind of Native Americans throughout this continent had also tremendous knowledge of the plants around them and the impact that they could have on health. And of course, today we see all of this as like anecdotal, maybe hit or miss kind of evidence on it, but it is unequivocal that there was a very important role that food played for the maintenance of health and nourishment. And of course, what happened over millennia is that we've domesticated, those crops that we have found most calorie efficient and productive for our lives. We've gone through a very deliberate process. I cannot think of a more expert university than UC Davis to kind of touch base on this with. So you know this better than I do, but kind of the transition that our most productive agricultural products, wheat, corn, and rice, have gone through from their kind of original kind of state to where they are today. And of course, it's no surprise that most of our food comes from these three crops. Indeed, 60% of our calories come from wheat, corn, and rice. And 18 crops make up more than 90% of our calories in today's diet. And there are over 50,000 plants known to have a history of human consumption. So there is a very vast kind of opportunity space of that we basically don't access in our food system today. And I wanted to point this out and put a pin on it, because we'll come back to this point in a few minutes. So let me shift gears a little bit, and this is part of the journey. And I want to share another snapshot on consumer health, because food today, while it was originally focused on its medicinal properties and its role in nourishment, it is not necessarily that way today, and it is very much top of mind for consumers. So there are so many kind of charts and data to share what why consumers think health is important, and what is what are the latest shifts and trends in that space. But if I can boil it down to a single data point, and the one that I find really interesting is, what are people actually searching for on Google? Because that also gives you a sense of what's on their mind. And preparing for this chat, we found a really interesting statistic that consumers have kind of increased in the last year 40% of the search of a certain phrase of eating. So benefits of eating salmon, impact of eating sweet potato, the interest of what is the impact of eating in by deduction in my own body has continuously increased. And of course, I find that fascinating because we are, hopefully coming out of a really tough time health-wise globally. And COVID has a lot to do with this, a lot to do with why consumers are turning to pay attention to their health, to their inherent health, and why they're curious about what food can do for them from that perspective. So, but there is a really big and real question in this interchange between the food world and the health world, which is what is healthy? There has been, I don't know if I can't see you all, unfortunately, but I'm sure many of you remember, when we all thought it was okay to eat, Jell-O because it was sugar-free, or low-carb versions of products, or sugar-free versions or fat-free versions of products. And I kind of bring those back from like 20 years ago or so, because the food industry has not given very concrete guidance on what is good for you and why consistently. We of course see a lot of alternative protein, and consumers are faced with a lot of alternative protein for a diet that is less oriented towards animal meat. And there is a lot of conversations about whether that is indeed healthier for you. I think there is consensus on one thing, that real food is indeed good for you. And I'll also share some more data on that towards the end. But the socioeconomic question around it is, at what price? It is actually pretty expensive to have consistent, fresh, ready-made meals. Expensive from a monetary perspective, and also from a time and resources perspective. And so when you look at it individually, that may very well be a really important path towards individual consumer health. When you look at it from a societal perspective, it has some real barriers that are important to to be aware of when thinking of fundamental societal shifts. So let's shift on this journey. We've baselined kind of where our food, the role that our food has played, where most of our calories in food come from. 3 out of 50,000 potential plant sources, to give you one data point. We've underscored that consumers are interested in health, and that health is kind of hard to pin down. Although the industry is trying really hard to play there, and to play there, in a credible way. So let's put a pin on all of that, and then shift gears a little bit and talk about the health landscape. I like to do big zoom outs and have a perspective on where are we all going from a macro socioeconomical view, and then zoom all the way into, so what am I going to do about it? So I'll give you that big landscape, and then I'll land it on what Brightseed was founded to do 5 years ago, and how we're using AI. We've my mother today is one of that, like 14% on the orange box on the left-hand side. She, about 14% of the population is over 60 today. But my daughter, when she's an elderly woman, will be 30% of the population by the time she's reaches that part of her age. And it's a really big deal because as the population gets older, it means that less people will be there to support their aging years. And so society no longer looks like a pyramid, but it starts to look like a cylinder. And I think that would be fine if we all aged, like these folks. I hope that one day I'm like, this hot dame over here at Helen Mirren, or like jumping out of a plane when I'm, whatever age this guy is. But unfortunately, most people do not age like these two examples, and it is pretty unfortunate, very sad, and getting worse. The majority of the population is getting not only older, but also sicker with conditions that are chronic diseases. So chronic diseases are, essentially non-communicable diseases. So things that aren't that you don't get infected by. And there are very important risk factors to chronic disease. Importantly, lifestyle, tobacco, nutrition, exercise, and alcohol all are very related to whether or not you're going to suffer from stroke, a heart attack, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension. So it is a really important point to know that chronic diseases are, although not entirely in our control, can really be impacted by not only our lifestyle decisions, but the ecosystem that we make our choices in. It's really hard to make the right choice when all I have is a like a vending machine full of crappy snacks. So it's not only our choices, but it's also the ecosystem that we're in that can have an impact on the rise of all of these chronic conditions. And what maybe the top 3 of the chronic conditions you see here, stroke, heart attack, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, the top 5, are really related to one underlying condition, which is obesity. Obesity is also going up. What this chart tells us is that 50% of US adults are obese or severely obese, and very alarmingly, 25% of of kids are obese or severely obese. It is not only a US problem, this is also a global problem. North America, Northern Africa, most of Europe, and Central and South America actually suffer from this slow pandemic. And I love how Dari Masafarian has called obesity a slow pandemic and COVID a fast pandemic over a slow pandemic. And I think COVID underscored the importance of chronic disease and the issues that can get complicated when chronic disease, in particular the ones that are related to obesity and metabolic health, are underlying in the population. And then we get an infectious disease like COVID on top of it. So for folks that had underlying conditions, and cardiovascular disease and diabetes are related to obesity and metabolic health, hospitalizations were 6 times higher, and deaths were 12 times higher for folks that contracted COVID. So even if in the US, our infection rate was on par or maybe even lower than other parts of the world, we had higher hospitalizations, complications, and deaths because of the fact that over 50% of the US suffers from obesity, and chronic conditions are so common. Unsurprisingly, this is very expensive for society. So it is, quite unsustainable, the healthcare dollars that are going to this spend. And then remember those graphs where kind of the population is getting older and society is no longer like a pyramid, but more like a cylinder. It's a problem because the more older folks are more diseased, the more expensive this is going to get, and these costs will balloon even further. So 90% of every healthcare dollar spent in the US is on chronic issues. And not surprisingly, half of that is related to obesity. So, I also want to, kind of underscore how unusual this is. 20% of GDP goes to healthcare expenditures, and that is more than twice the average of other OECD countries. So we are spending twice as more on conditions that are mostly, preventable or really managed through those, choice and ecosystem risk factors. On importantly, on conditions around obesity, and it feels like it's a kind of a situation that is altogether, preventable. We got ourselves into this spot, and how can we get ourselves out is a really big question. So let's track the story so far. Food is supposed to nourish. We've, maybe chosen a few select crops, perhaps processed our way out of that because, who knows what healthy is anymore. Consumers really want it, but society's trends are pointing to trouble. We have an aging population that's older, that's sicker, with diseases that can be prevented and that are costing society most of our healthcare spend and almost 20% of our GDP. So we all think there is a magical solve, and perhaps some of you are thinking, well, all we need to do is kind of exercise and eat less, and that will make this kind of troubling situation better. And that is a good hypothesis, but one of the world leading experts on the topic, Dr. Barry Mastafarian, who is the dean of the Tufts School of Nutrition, just published this paper, which I know I'm speaking to an audience that is kind of keeps up with academic literature. And what he found is that obesity is rising. That red line is essentially kind of the summary of the lines the curves, obesity curves I showed you before. However, over the same period of time, energy intake, essentially food, the orange line, has remained steady. And energy available, essentially, exercise or lack of exercise, the blue line has remained pretty steady. So there's something going on in the type of calories that we eat that are increasing obesity, irrespective of whether or not we exercise. There are kind of consumer terms used to lately around nutrient density, empty calories, and the World Health Organization report that found that the increasing availability of ultra-processed foods are a driver of population weight gain. So it's not as simple as calories in, calories out. There's something else around the calories that has an impact. And this is really, I find mind-blowing data. It's a very recent paper just published this year. And there's a really big question, like, what is going on? What's happening? How can we, keep this very steep obesity trend while, our calories seem to be steady and our exercise seems to be steady overall? And how do we stop this runaway train that is headed for a cliff, on the healthcare costs to society? So this is where AI comes in, and this is Brightseed's answer, to this conundrum. We believe that natural bioactives are absolutely critical for our health. And natural bioactives are small molecules that plants produce. Plants, of course, again, I'm speaking to the choir, but just to level set, plants have proteins, They have carbohydrates or sugars. They produce lipids and oils. And importantly, they produce small molecules, natural chemicals that they use to communicate with their environment, to attract bees and repel pests and, buffer up their defenses. And they are prolific producers of these natural chemicals because that's the only way that they can survive, in a changing environment. And our hypothesis is that these natural bioactives are absolutely critical for health. We already know them. They are, we all had maybe caffeine this morning in our coffee or tea. Caffeine is a natural bioactive found in a plant bean. We know curcumin and turmeric. These are bioactive compounds that are present in natural products, plants as one example, and absolutely fundamental for the well-functioning of our bodies. Because we know that science has pointed to the fact that when we eat a diet that is rich in plants, we live long and healthy lives. And when we double click into that, I want to share two big takeaways from a study published in The Lancet in 2019 about the diet determinants of health. The first one was that the single most important determinant of health is diet, which is huge. Again, linking what we've been talking about, like the role of food to health and to kind of today's needs in society. So the number one determinant of longevity is diet. And the second thing that they found is that the lives that are essentially cut short and are prematurely are not necessarily due because of diets high in bad stuff, diets that are high in trans fats, in sugary beverages, in sodium. Of course, that plays a really important role, and I don't want to undermine it. However, diets that were deficient in nuts and grains and fruits and vegetables and seeds, those diets were 3 times more deadly than the diets that were high in the bad stuff, 3 times more likely to lead to premature death, which is, if you take away one thing from this slide, is you can have your junk food or your candy, or it won't be good for you. Make sure to have a salad next to it, because if you starve your body from these kind of fundamental ingredients, then that is categorically, longitudinally leads to a premature death. On the other hand, pharma has known that natural products produce really successful drugs. 2/3 of FDA-approved drugs are derived from natural products. They are in everything, such as aspirin for your headache, Taxol for breast cancer, metformin for diabetes. All of these active ingredients are actually derived from compounds that are found in plant sources, in the willow tree, in the French lilac, and in the Pacific yew tree. So we know that without them, we die prematurely. We know that these compounds isolated can be extremely potent and powerful. And the problem is that we don't know too much about them. So 99% of the phytochemicals that nature has already provided are yet to be discovered. And some academic groups call this the dark matter of the plant kingdom. We know it's there because it leads to long, healthy lives. We know that without it, we die prematurely. We know that isolated bits can be really powerful drugs, but we are in the dark about, what is the phytochemical structure or the phytochemical composition of most of the natural products or the natural plant sources that are around us. So there's a very good reason why it is extremely hard to isolate every molecule inside a like a fixed plant source, and there is basically no instrument powerful enough in the world to do that. There is no microscope powerful enough in the world to see that. And what Brightseed has done is to build an AI that can uncover these natural bioactives so that we can use them very deliberately, very precisely, and for potency to promote proactive health. So we've built a platform called Forager that connects plants, their compounds, and the impact that these compounds can have for health. And have seen really exciting things come from it. It is a collection of algorithms that predict and elucidate kind of a compound structure and from the raw material itself. And so we are amassing plant materials in the lab physically. We profile them for their phytochemical structure, and then we use AI to then predict what these natural chemicals can do for health, which ones of these natural chemicals are indeed bioactive. And we are really excited to be able to make a dent in all of this kind of problematic between the relationship between food and health and the really important moment that society is at now, this moment of a slow pandemic overlapped with a fast pandemic and a structural system of both a food ecosystem and food choices that are somehow obesogenic without necessarily without necessarily delivering the nourishment that food was originally meant to. And we're really excited, however, to be able to make a dent and believe that we are indeed in the cusp of a generational change towards proactive health. The healthcare system, indeed the pharmaceutical system, was created to essentially react to infectious disease because we used to die of infectious disease much more often than of chronic illnesses. And this, paradigm where we get treated only after being diagnosed with a disease doesn't scale with chronic illness. So what does scale is a very pointed, powerful, and potent visibility into natural bioactives that can lead to a longer and healthier lives. So that is that's the overview that I wanted to share with you today. I think if you walk away with one main takeaway from this conversation, I would love it to be the following. And knowing that you all and like I are engaged in solving the world's most challenging problems with technology, with AI, in particular in our food system, to make it more sustainable, to make it more nutritious. I encourage you to go after the very big problems that society must face and turn your brain and your energy towards bringing technology to life that can move the needle in a way that matters.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia. It's Harold. So, and again, I still haven't figured my camera out. So I can see you and I can see the slide,
hey, Harold,
so that everybody who's in attendance and I can. I'm seeing everybody in the screen, but just not. You guys can't see me. I apologize. Anyway, so that was a great talk, and if everyone could, if you want to ask questions, please go to the chat. Spot and submit your questions there, and I can see them, or if I miss them, Hannah will see them. So I did want to start with a few questions, if you don't mind. So one is, you guys have, I think you guys have really, we had a couple of talks during the last speaker series. So from UC Davis in particular that was I think highly related, Gail Taylor, and she's got a program, you know, looking from the plant science perspective and sorting through bioactives. And when you and I and other folks from APHIS were chatting, you immediately looked it up and said, yeah, that looks super relevant. And it definitely is. So I'm curious, and I asked her this question, and I want to ask you this question. From the Brightseed perspective, have you guys been able to quantify what your approach, and especially the AI approach, has done in terms of your, you know, speed of innovation? So for example, are you starting to get a feel for how much faster you can get to a discovery that's relevant in this small molecules from plants and, you know, nutrition space? Have you been able to quantify speed to product, you know, interactions with customers, that sort of thing? It'd be great to hear your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I love that question because it drives to value, right? It's like, how have you, you know, how can you quantify the value you've generated? And we are, one of our very first metrics for that is kind of speed to qualified lead. So I'll give you some context. We are in the business of discovering what is it in the natural kingdom that can have a very precise and powerful health effect from a molecular level. And it may be one or a combination of molecules. And the very first step that, you know, to know whether or not you're headed in the right direction is a qualified lead. So once you get a compound that in vitro has shown lit up an assay that indicates that you're going in the right direction, and then you follow from there with preclinical and clinical data to take it to market and validate its health benefit. So that time to qualified lead is a really important indicator. We have compared our approach, which is all computational. This is where we do a really big leverage of a Forager system. Not all of that Forager can do, but the predictive power of what is in the plant and what can it do for you. And we've compared that with labs that are state-of-the-art labs, high throughput robotic screening, that, however, don't have a guided computational search, and labs that tend to be medchem programs, pharmaceutical programs that are looking for through synthetic compounds for candidates that can also be qualified leads. And we've compared head-to-head their approach of going high throughput through libraries of synthetic compounds and our approach of down selecting to what Forager predicts is likely to work, and then just testing, you know, those predictions. And the order of magnitude is huge. The synthetic high throughput approach is, in the case where we have benchmarked, took them 3 years to find a qualified lead. And we compare that to 3 months that it took us to find a qualified lead for the same bioassay, pointing towards metabolic health precisely. So I think that is a very first indicator that we hold ourselves to, is time to qualified lead. And that is something that is really hard to compare, like a really hard comparison with other approaches that don't share this benefit of the AI that we've developed.
Wow. So what you're saying, and I just want to, so you used the phrase or word magnitude. So I was hoping, you know, I mean, we're all enthusiasts on this call. So, I mean, what you're saying you guys are seeing is literally something in the neighborhood of a 10x, you know, acceleration, basically.
That's right. And this certainly, for sure, on the discovery side. And I also want to be very clear that after you have a qualified lead, we have to go through clinical data, and we need to process a product, and all of that work is actually consistent with you know, any other approach. So there is, AI is not magic, and AI cannot solve, that hard physical work, or not everything. However, there is another part which we are use AI for, which is sourcing. So once we know that there is a bioactive compound that is lighting up the bioacid, we ask Forager, what other plant sources have this compound, and then we source from there, and that also speeds up the path to market because we can get to economic sources faster, and have many more options.
So, and there's a question from Danielle LeMay that we're going to go to next, but I just want to exercise the prerogative and ask one more question, because what you just said is sort of leading to something super important. So number one is so acceleration of the discovery piece, very, very exciting. As a business, you're also finding acceleration of the innovation cycle, which is what you just referred to, and that's really, really important. And so I guess my question to you is, do you guys feel like, and I'm sure the answer is yes in some way, but it'd be great to hear your perspective to it. Do you feel like Brightseed is actually, you have competitors in this space in some form or another in terms of natural products, chemistry companies, and bioactive suppliers, and ingredient companies, and so on and so forth. But how competitive do you feel with these people, or do you feel like you're literally opening up a different space with a totally different approach compared to what exists in the legacy infrastructure right now?
I would kind of answer that question maybe a little indirectly, but I think that I hope we have many competitors, and because this is a really big problem, and it's a really big opportunity space, and man, if we can, as an ecosystem, move the needle on what we just talked about, it's imperative that we do. And so it's I think Brightseed's approach is very novel, and it's yielding really interesting things, and there are competitors in the sense that we work with partners and other companies work with the same partners, and R&D dollars are limited, and that's a reality, and that in that sense there are many players in the space that are innovating. I think no one is quite doing what we do and how we do it, and I hope hope we all use our brains and energy on this question and figure out their best approaches to how to solve for food becoming a true vector for health.
Great. So Hannah, I cannot see Danielle's question that she posted, but I see that she says she did post it. Are you able to see it?
That's all right. Yeah, I can read it out.
Great.
So AI has to learn from data. And what type of data does your Forager system use to learn from?
Good question. We generate a lot of data in-house. We bring plants and process them internally, and that is one core source of data. Another core source of data is biomedical literature. We process all of that, and when you saw Forager, 3 pillars: plants, their compounds, and health. That third pillar is really informed by existing data that becomes training data. So yes, when I'm talking in an AI event, like, data has to be big and it has to be clean, and because otherwise garbage in and garbage out.
Yes, Hannah, please do read them because I'm not seeing them, so go for it.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, we have a few more questions from the Q&A section, so I'll go through those one by one. So Andy Rodriguez asks if we have an idea of the healing compounds we are looking for in plants, would taking the GMO or genetic engineering approach be more effective?
Good question. I think like Brightseed is doesn't, I don't have an opinion as to, or a dogma as to whether or not we should use GMO for one reason or another. And I think that the opportunity to bring these bioactive compounds to as many people as possible is a really important imperative. And I also know that it starts in the plant and in the soil that the plant belongs to, right? It's not a synthetic powder that goes into a pill. So and the how the plant is bred, what is it bred to express is fundamental. And this whole, those images of corn and how it started and where it is. I mean, we've bred non-GMO or GMO or non-GMO, we've bred plants for calorie efficiency and for productivity and for shelf stability. And in some cases, in fruits, we've bred them for color. And we just haven't known to breed them for health because we haven't seen the bioactive compounds that are inside that can actually make a difference. So I would love to get, I know that the day is right around the corner to say, we know exactly how to breed this carrot or potato or, strawberry or fill in the blank, so that it can be a true clinically validated, vector for health.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like they're complementary approaches.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And then continuing on the theme of plants, another question in the Q&A here from Ying Sun. There are so many plants in the world and many different types of plants. How do you choose which plants to look at and where do you source these plants? Are you only limited to plants with fully sequenced genomes?
Good question. We start with plants that are part of our diet, so or are known, have a history of human consumption. Do that 50,000 purple bubble that I shared is a good place to start. There are 350,000 plants out there. Once we've screened the 50 or 60,000, then we can go from there. So there's plants that are part of our diets for a reason, and we've uncovered things in very known plants. And so we don't need to go to obscure and exotic things to identify powerful bioactives. We're not limited to plants that have fully sequenced genomes, but we do, ingest all omics data that we can.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. And then one more from the Q&A section. You talked a lot about the health challenges that we face. And this question is about health inequalities, which are a growing reality in today's world. How do you see Brightseed and maybe others in AI research addressing that? And, this makes me think of the Biden administration just announced a White House conference on ending hunger, improving nutrition and physical activity, and reducing diet-related diseases and disparities. And that seems really relevant to what you talked about today. So what kind of is your role and others in this space in addressing that?
I love this question, and I'm so glad you asked it, because there are so many versions of the data that I showed that point to unequivocal inequalities between health outcomes based on socioeconomic status, based on race, based on different types of community access, and it is heartbreaking. And I think that there is kind of the most kind of true way to answer your question, and this is what Brightseed is doing, and I really hope that others in AI and research can address this, is to keep these issues front and center. I think as one is starting like a company or research, panning out to the big picture and panning out to the, in this case, the health inequalities that exist, and designing the solution that you're working on, with that big issue in mind is fundamentally important, because that's the only way that we will move the needle, if we have the big issue in mind. And it's really easy, especially as we're building. I can speak as an entrepreneur, and as we're building, and I'm sure you all in your programs, as you're working on what's here and now, on the building of the company or the research that needs to produce, and it's sometimes hard to lose the forest for the trees and to keep those health inequalities top of mind. So that was a long-winded answer, but bottom line, we address it by being explicit about them as an issue and by designing for that.
Yeah, great answer to an important question.
So there's another question here that I see from Danielle. So what is the next step if you find you find one of these qualified leads, a valuable compound? If you sell anything other than a whole food, does it, doesn't that add to the problem of ultra processed foods? And is it difficult to combine foods without adding emulsifiers, gums, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I touched on this really briefly and quickly in the slide of what is healthy. I think ideally real food is lots of it, and lots of plants within that menu is ideal, and unfortunately that's inaccessible to many. And so I think the answer will have to be in some way, shape, or form convenience oriented, in addition to breeding for super nutritious stuff, or growing and super nutritious stuff. The convenience factor is here to stay, and the knowledge that we are not processing out the stuff that matters is, I think, what will be different in the future. So an ultra processed food that is denurtured versus a intentionally designed shelf stable food that actually has the components that have been proven to be valuable, and in the most whole way possible, is also packaged and shelf stable, but it is I think a different kind of a different it's a part of the solution, and I really do mean it's only a part of it, because we kind of, the next version of that could be an extract of that contains a bioactive compound in a capsule form, or a derivative of that, for certain therapeutic applications even. So we see the entire health spectrum from agriculture and all the way through consumer health, and we think all of those applications have a role to play in a healthy society.
So we're getting close to the end here. That was, I really appreciate that very thoughtful answer. And so I want to ask one more question. And frankly, the last sentence you said there, that describes a land-grant university, at least to the spirit of a land-grant university from the 1862's perspective, of which the APHIS consortium is built on. So Davis, Berkeley, Cornell, Illinois. And so I'm just curious if you've had any chance to think about, or just shoot from the hip, be great. How could APHIS, as far as you know it, and part of it is getting, us getting to know each other better, but do you have any thoughts about how this group, this consortium could best help a company like Brightseed? How do you wish we could collaborate going forward in a way that's valuable for you?
Really good question, Harold, and I'm gonna take your offer to shoot from the hip, because I would love to get to know each other better. I see two, and two opportunities and riffing. One of them is on kind of our knowledge of plants and continuing to partner on expanding that knowledge base. And another is talent. I'm not sure if this is the right thing to say in this group or not, but we're growing.
It is. And, you should say it. Go ahead.
And we're hiring. So shameless plug. It takes a lot of really committed, smart, engaged people to that are passionate about solving really big problems with the cutting edge technology. And we're growing in our San Francisco location. We just opened a site in North Carolina for development and commercialization. And so kind of research on common areas of interest and talent are my two shoot from the hip answers.
Awesome. Thank you. So Hannah, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic and robust discussion. Thank you, Harold, for facilitating it. And thank you so much, Sophia, for talking with us today. I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone else on the call did as well. So we really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Yeah, and we look forward to talking to you again at our panel discussion with all of our spring speakers. So to be announced on that date, but we look forward to that at the end of May or early June.
Same to you. Talk soon.